Hi, welcome back to Cubs and Culture for January 14th, 2018. Continuing our discussion of Brokeback Mountain. Okay, so I want to spend a lot of time talking about direction in this movie because, as I said, it feels to me like it fits more comfortably in as a piece of Ang Lee cinema as opposed to a queer piece of cinema. So there's this concept in filmmaking called mezzanine scene, which is just a fancy way of saying everything that happens, or everything that's in the scene. And real briefly, in horror films, etc., this is much more obvious than a lot of other times. It's the notion that the exterior world, how scenes are shot, everything that's seen within the scene reflects the interior of the character. So it really took off as a concept with this group of films called German Expressionism. Nosferatu and The Cabin of Dr. Caryagi and Metropolis are probably the three most famous, where, let me just stick with The Cabin of Dr. Caryagi, all the sets and everything is twisted and turned in dark shadows and jagged lines because it takes place within the mind of an insane person. So the sets are literally reflecting the mental state of the character. Now, some films take this very far, like Dr. Caryagi. A lot of other films don't, but it's still the sort of way in which the environments, or the colors, or the lighting, however you want to say it, often influences how we feel about the characters. And one of the things I really like about Ang Lee as a filmmaker is he's really good at always sort of meeting because his filmography has so many different genres. I mean, I haven't seen Woodstock, so that might be a musical, but like the only genre he hasn't really made is a musical, and he really does a good job of shooting the film so it fits absolutely comfortably in with the genre in terms of like just basic structure, but with the way in which he chooses sort of very specific elements within scenes. His mezzanine scene always seems to give his films a mythical quality or grand sort of grandness. So again, this movie is principally a contemporary western, and it's shot very much like there's absolutely nothing in this film in terms of its shooting style that a Howard Hawks or Ford would be upset about. It's very, very classical, the way in which characters are situated in the scenes, the way in which the environment has establishing shots, how the camera's kept pretty much at a medium distance, even during close-ups. There are a couple of close-ups, but it's not the extreme stuff you get in like Leone's films. Okay, but there's also so on one level it's absolutely classical, but then on another level you have things like Jack, who's sort of the more open and adventurous character, also the character who's pushing Del Mar to fully commit to the relationship. He is routinely shown, not 100% exclusively, but he's routinely shown in skyish blue. So you kind of subconsciously associate him with the color blue. This is most clearly shown in the shirts at the end. His is the blue shirt. Likewise, Del Mar, who's sort of the more closed character, or the more, excuse the pun, but heavy character, he's routinely shown earth tones and browns. And so, again, you subconsciously notice this. So it comes across as both sort of Del Mar's too heavy for the situation, and it's the sky meeting the earth. It's a love story, or another sort of way in which this always comes across in terms of the direction is because, again, Del Mar as the character is the one who is most conflicted about the relationship, he's also the one that ultimately is preventing them to being together. So he's often, when during scenes of conflict or talking about, hey, we're going to meet up next month or anything like that, stuff like that, he is shown with his face always partially obscured by shadow a lot. Again, it's not 100% of the time, but it's enough of the time that it's clearly a visual motif within the film. Whereas, excuse me, Jack is always shown, especially when they're discussing the relationship, full face and fully in light. This is most clearly seen in the first time after they come after it's basically the end of the first act, at the point where they're going to be starting to be separated. Twist asks Delmar, "Hey, we're going to see you next year," and Gyllenhaal is completely in light, and because of the way it's staged, Heath Ledger's half of his face is covered in shadow. Okay, or the other sort of thing about this. It's a really good example. There's a scene late towards the end of the movie, right before, like, Jack has had enough, and they're washing dishes in a stream, and then Jack gets up because he's sick of Delmar not committing to the relationship, in essence, and it's Delmar who's himself causing this, and he's washing a pot. And as Jack walks away, a little pot ends up going down the stream that Delmar has to catch. So it's totally, if you're paying attention, it totally comes across as if they're like, this is it. They're going to separate. So it's that sort of attention to very subtle detail that makes this feel very much like an Ann Lee film. The other sort of thing in which just talking about direction, it's the way in which, again, because the central sort of theme of this film is the way in which societal expectations damage people, the way in which the nature scenes are shot. So when they're out on Brokeback Mountain, there's a barrenness in the entire film because it's a tragedy, but there's a sort of instead of being barren there's a hollowness to the way in which the nature scenes feel are shot in this film. And so you feel the harshness of the environment, but at the same time you can feel like excuse me, why someone would want to be there. Whereas sort of the interior scenes, they have that harshness quality, but then it's also unwelcoming to a large degree. So outdoor scenes feel tragic, but like romantic but tragic. Whereas the interior scenes feel uninviting and barren. This is most clearly seen in the Jack Twist family's house. Excuse me. Jack Twist's family's house when he goes and gets the shirts. Now, I want to quickly. The last thing I kind of want to say about the direction is, because this is a love story and because it's a Western love story, it's a lot more about a lot of this movie is not in the dialogue. A lot of it's in what's not said. And Ang Lee was very good at coaxing performances out of people where it is a lot about the body language. And the best sort of example I can think about this is Jack Twist as a character is the one who's mostly driving the relationship at beginning. This is why he's often shown in the first act literally being in front of Delmar, because he's the one who's sort of most comfortable in sort of his own skin, etc., 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 and he's driving a relationship, whereas Delmar is the one sort of holding everyone back. But the thing is, there's several times, and you can see this at the beginning where Jack very blatantly using a mirror to check out Delmar, but then you also get in the very next scene this sort of flirtatious moment where Delmar very subtly catches out of turns and out of catches of sort of checks Jack out, but it's played by Ledger where it's just subtle enough where if you're not really where if you're like on the first pass, you might not even notice it, but it comes across not erotic, but just him looking around the first time you see it. It's only when you see them film again you realize doing it. Or there's several times in the first act before the sex scene where like Jack is riding away and Del Mar is looking at him, and Hedger ever so slightly turns his head slightly more than you need to actually see him in relation to the scene, and it comes across as again flirtatious or interested erotically, and that sort of subtle acting is Ang Lee gets that from all of his actors, where it's again it feels very classical the way in which it's sort of naturalistic acting, but then there's ever so slightly shifted where there's just enough something there that you wonder something. So you also sort of get the idea at the end how much Jack's wife, how much she knew about him having multiple affairs with men. Okay, so that's good for part 2. See you in a bit.